Welcome to Novara Live. I am once again Michael Walker, and I'm joined once again by Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, welcome back to the show.
Michael, thank you for having me back. Very nice to be here as ever.
We've got lots to talk about this evening. Israel has launched a new operation in the West Bank. Surprise, surprise, there's a ceasefire in Gaza, so they've gone with their military to the West Bank. In Gaza, we speak to a Palestinian teacher about life there during the genocidal war and now in the ceasefire. Really, really powerful interview, I have to say. And we'll end by talking about whether Elon Musk did in fact perform a Nazi salute at the rally that followed the inauguration. It sure looked like one. Donald Trump's first 24 hours back in office has, as expected, come with a flurry of executive orders from the new president, as reported here by Sky News.
If there ever was an image for the ages, the scribble of the pen, the pile of files, each one an executive order from the new president.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages, approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Each one affecting profound change.
Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sir?
Ooh, that's a big one.
Each one a major story in their own right.
This is an executive order taking a large number of executive actions to secure our southern border.
Okay.
This was the end of a dizzying day. Look at the faces on his chiefs of staff. Then an impromptu news conference in an Oval Office that is now his again.
I'll be meeting with President Putin.
And hints of the future on whatever topic you choose.
You know, Gaza's interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather. You know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it.
Those were some potentially ominous words about Gaza from New York's real estate king, I should say. And we'll park that conversation for a moment and focus on the executive orders for now. You heard him talk about the January 6th rioters as hostages. This is really, really extraordinary. Ooh, that's a big one when he's told about leaving the WHO. The US's exit from the World Health Organization could be significant. You also heard there about a flurry of actions on the border with Mexico. These policies, I think, are clearly designed to appeal to Trump's socially conservative and sometimes conspiratorial MAGA base, the conspiratorial base, especially when it comes to the World Health Organization. But Donald Trump does also have another base. This photo is from Trump's inauguration, and it includes the world's richest man, Elon Musk, on the right, the world's second richest man, Jeff Bezos, in the middle, and the world's third richest man, Mark Zuckerberg, on the left. You can also see Google CEO Sundar Pichai in there. The woman is Jeff Bezos' wife, or fiance, I think, in fact. In Trump's first wave of executive orders, he's had a lot to keep all of those guys happy. First, in a broader freeze on federal hires, Trump singled out the Internal Revenue Service for cuts. The IRS had been given extra funding by the Biden administration in an attempt to help it collect more taxes from the wealthy. So it's the equivalent of our HMRC. Trump now wants to defund it. So the idea from Biden was, let's beef up the HMRC or the IRS, and that will pay for itself because we'll get some extra sort of tax agents and they can make sure people are paying their tax. The wealthy didn't like that. Trump's putting a freeze on them hiring anyone. When it comes to the international scene, Trump has also blown up any hope of an international regime to limit tax avoidance by global tech giants. This is probably most significant for the men you saw in that image. Some background here. In 2021, the G7 agreed to back a minimum global corporate tax rate of 15%. The idea was to stop tax havens competing to attract tech giants like Amazon and Facebook with super low tax rates. How it works is essentially they say, well, all of our intellectual property is in Ireland or Jersey or the British Virgin Islands, and they say that's really where the profit is being made, even though all the revenue is being made in the United States or Europe or these countries that might have higher tax levels. So a complete sort of fix, really, really sort of damaging. And in 2023, that global tax minimum, that idea was agreed by 138 countries at the OECD. It was considered a historic milestone. Now, the scheme, which began to be introduced last year, works by making companies that are headquartered in tax havens pay top-up taxes to the countries in which they actually operate. So the idea being to reduce tax avoidance and somewhat level the playing field between governments and multinational companies. Good policy, as you can imagine, the big companies like Meta and Amazon, it was designed to target, didn't like it, and so now, man of the people, Donald Trump has got rid of it. An executive order signed last night pulls the US out of the global corporate tax deal, and it gets worse because not only has Trump said the US won't participate in the scheme, but he has said the United States government will seek to punish any countries that do. So his executive order requires officials to draw up retaliatory measures against any country that seeks to impose extraterritorial taxes on US companies. That could include charging extra levies on companies from countries that do take part in the minimum tax scheme or withholding other payments from those governments. So if we, as a country, remain part of this global minimum tax and sort of apply these top-up taxes to American companies, then we will get punished as a country, and our companies will get punished. And that does mean this is pretty much full-on sabotage. It will have wide-ranging impacts. Alex Chobham is director of the Tax Justice Network. He told the Financial Times the order leaves the minimum tax scheme dead in the water. And he said this: if you take this statement at face value, so this is the executive order, there's every chance they come back in 60 days and say most countries of the world and most OECD member countries should be subject to the countermeasures they're talking about. So he's willing to go to war, well, at least financially, in terms of sort of taking retaliatory tactics or sort of retaliatory measures against companies with the entire OECD and most of the world. Kieran, people have been talking a lot about how this time around Trump has the tech billionaires on side. Before, not so much. This time, absolutely. He seems to be rewarding them pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary to see them all there lined up around him, combined wealth totaling into the trillions. In 100 years' time, it will be like looking back a photo of the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies with the president of their day at the end of the 19th century, representatives of the second Gilded Age. I mean, the obvious problem for society, global society, but particularly obviously in the West now, is, as you alluded to, Michael, where America goes, others follow. So America makes the weather on these matters. It sets the agenda, and it's very possible within certain limits to stake out a different course economically, etc., especially if you're part of a regional bloc like the EU. But the capacity to do that becomes vastly reduced if, as you pointed out, America is willing to use its vast power to impose punitive sanctions on countries who want to take a different trajectory economically and so on. I think so. That's the first obvious thing, and the first obvious set of ramifications for other nation states and parts of the world. But I think another very serious thing is that we are in, all of us in Western society, but I think across the world, we are in very serious sinking sand now. We're on quicksand because these policies, they tend to benefit the very wealthy, that's obvious, and they tend to make the vast majority of people even poorer, or they tend to lead to stagnation of the middle classes. Now, my fear is that as those kinds of policies, which in many cases would have been voted for, obviously voted for by Trump supporters, will start to bite those voters and those supporters, the tide of anger in American society will rise even higher. And that tide will be used as fuel by right-wing political entrepreneurs, clever right-wing pundits, online influencers, and so on, to fuel the next round of quasi-fascist neoliberal shock therapy. And of course, a version of this is going on in the UK as well. But it's a vicious cycle, and I think breaking it is probably the preeminent challenge facing the left today, because if we don't manage to break it, then I'm afraid we're in for even darker times ahead.
And I mean, researching this story, looking into the background of it, this did seem to be sort of one of the aspects where the Biden administration, had some reasonable things to say. So this global minimum tax, I think Janet Yellen was one of the people pushing for it. It definitely sort of had criticisms because people were saying 15% isn't high enough. Obviously, if you had a global minimum tax that was a bit higher, then you would be able to get more tax from those companies. But it would have sort of hurt the tax havens a bit, and it would have hurt the multinational corporations who want to house themselves in those tax havens a bit. And I suppose it is one of the examples where Biden and his administration did break with sort of some of the neoliberalism of the past 40 years and were going in a somewhat interesting new direction. Obviously, they were terrible in other ways. On Gaza, as we've talked about so much on this show, Joe Biden, couldn't really have been worse. But when it comes to sort of global international political economy, they were doing some interesting things. And I suppose, is it a shame that the government that seemed to be more open-minded when it comes to this stuff was only a one-term government and then was replaced by Donald Trump, who is so sort of flagrantly unashamed in his sort of shaping the law to be to the advantage of his billionaire friends?
Yeah, so, as you allude to, it's difficult litigating on behalf of Biden or for Biden because Gaza so overshadows anything and everything that could be said to be progressive that the Biden administration did. Certainly, in my mind, it does. Nonetheless, it is true that as far as domestic economic policy goes, there was something of a break in the Biden administration with the kind of total neoliberal consensus. Certainly the kind of neoliberalism that you saw under another Democrat president, i.e. Bill Clinton. There was a kind of rupture with that consensus. So you had a couple of brief examples, the American Rescue Plan Act, which came in just after COVID. It was I think $700+ billion program aimed at strengthening social security, strengthening benefits, and paying money directly into the pockets of working Americans. So it was all working Americans. So it was a kind of a universal fiscal stimulus. It's not insignificant at all in sort of Keynesian economic terms. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was a massive, same year, 2021, just after COVID, a massive investment in infrastructure, public works, et cetera, which created, a good number of jobs and also contributed to the pretty impressive employment rates that the sort of early years of the Biden administration oversaw. So, certainly, to my mind, those economic policies don't go far enough in addressing wealth inequality and advancing social and economic justice. That is, it falls far short of those kinds of metrics for me and many on the left, of course. Nonetheless, insofar as those kinds of big government stimulus packages, etc., matter, we can expect to see many, many fewer of them over the next 4 years.
And not only fewer of them, I suppose that the ones that were there are being dismantled, which is so clear when it comes to this minimum tax rate. Let's look ahead to what might be sort of some issues dominating the story of Trump's first days for the second time in the White House. And in terms of domestic US policy, the big flare-ups look like they will involve Trump's immigration policy. Now, that's because it's here where his announcements could come up against the Constitution. The biggest issue here concerns birthright citizenship. Trump has signed an executive order that would treat the US-born children of undocumented immigrants as non-citizens. Now, it's worth pointing out, by international standards, not having birthright citizenship isn't an extreme policy. So looking at this today, I hadn't realised most of the Americas have birthright citizenship. So most of the Western hemisphere, I suppose, partly because they were settler states mainly. But Europe doesn't have birthright citizenship. The UK doesn't have birthright citizenship. So it's not one of those things, he's getting rid of birthright citizenship, therefore he's a fascist. However, it's an extreme thing to put into an executive order because it goes against the American Constitution. So this is the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So that's in the Constitution. Trump can't change that. He will, though, apparently try and get the courts to suggest that non-citizens aren't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which is that clause there. Currently, this applies to the children of diplomats, because diplomats are, in their embassy, I suppose, they're subject to the jurisdiction of the country where they're from. And I think actually they are everywhere, aren't they? Because they've got diplomatic immunity. Obviously, immigrants, whether sort of legal or otherwise, are still subject to the laws of the United States. They can be arrested and put in jail, right? So it'd be difficult to argue, but I suppose he does have a majority on the Supreme Court. But that will be one place where we see this tension, which I can expect we'll see lots of the institutions of the United States sort of trying to put some guardrails around Donald Trump's presidency. Will he be more effective this time around than he was 4 years ago when it comes to sort of outmaneuvering them? Probably, which is unfortunate, I suppose. The Gaza ceasefire has been in place for less than 3 days, and so far it seems to be holding. But that doesn't mean that Palestinians have been safe from Israeli aggression, because while a fragile peace has descended on Gaza, the Israeli military has launched a new operation in the occupied West Bank. Large numbers of armoured vehicles and bulldozers have reportedly entered the city, with Apache helicopters providing air cover to troops moving in from a military checkpoint north of the city. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 7 people have so far been killed in Jenin, with a further 35 injured. And this isn't just an ordinary raid on the city. Named Operation Iron Wall by the IDF, the campaign in Jenin follows the exit of Palestinian Authority security services from the city. And according to the IDF, it's aimed at rooting out terror cells. But statements from Israeli officials suggest it's also about making an example of Jenin. This was how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the operation. Under the direction of the Political Security Cabinet, the IDF, Shin Bet and the Israel Police today launched a large-scale and significant military operation to eradicate terrorism in Jenin. They're calling it the Iron Wall. This is another step towards achieving the goal we set, strengthening security in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as everyone else calls it. We are acting systematically and resolutely against the Iranian axis wherever it extends its arms in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Judea and Samaria, and with our hands still outstretched. Now, Netanyahu is clearly there drawing a connection between the operation in Jenin, the military's 15-month assault on Gaza, and all the other wars it's fighting, making them part of a larger military objective. And if Israel meant the Jenin operation as provocation intended to undermine the Gaza ceasefire, it may be working. So Hamas has responded to the action by calling for full mobilization in the West Bank. Now, if they mobilize in the West Bank, that shouldn't undermine the Gaza ceasefire, but you can see there are dangers here. The new IDF actions follow weeks in which Israeli action across the West Bank has been on the rise. 6 Palestinians were killed in Jenin a week ago in an Israeli drone attack, with 3 brothers and a 15-year-old boy amongst the dead. At the time, a Palestinian Authority spokesperson said the attack was aimed at disrupting efforts to achieve security in the city. And in the wake of the Gaza ceasefire, Israeli settlers have also attacked several Palestinian villages across the West Bank, reportedly with the passive support of the Israeli military. That's according to Israeli human rights organization Yesh Din and B'Tselem. All of this, of course, may be part of a potential side deal made between the new US President Donald Trump and Israel in the run-up to the signing of the Gaza ceasefire. Amongst the many executive orders signed by Trump on his first day in the Oval Office was one cancelling Biden-era sanctions against Israeli settlers in the West Bank. That's likely to be seen in Israel as a pretty clear indication of US support for further land grabs in Palestinian territory. Kieran, sort of in our coverage of the Gaza ceasefire on this show, we've sort of had lots of speculation, as people have been speculating everywhere, how Trump got Netanyahu to agree to the ceasefire. Now, there's one theory that he just put his foot down and was a bit more threatening than Biden. He wasn't sort of willing to be taken for a ride to the same degree that Biden was. The other is that he offered Netanyahu a bunch of things in return, potentially related to the West Bank. Is what we've seen over the past 24 hours evidence of what Trump might have promised, or is this just, what you'd expect to see anyway, I suppose?
I think, first of all, let's not forget that I think it's relevant to say Jenin was flattened, some less than 25 years ago, 2002, by marauding IDF thugs under the direction and directives of another war criminal, namely Ariel Sharon. I think, to your question, Michael, it's pretty obvious to me, at least it seems pretty obvious, that there was some horse trading going on, and that, Trump quite likely said something along the lines of, "You've had your fun in Gaza. It's drawing too much heat internationally. You're not particularly interested in Gaza, as far as colonization goes anyway. Certainly not in relation to the West Bank. If you respect this ceasefire, allow me or the outgoing Biden administration, whichever, to have the glory of overseeing it, then I will personally write you a blank check to colonize as much of the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as they like to call it, as you would like." And I think it seems to be pretty obvious that, given the stipulation about settlers is in his first set of executive orders, it seems pretty obvious to me that is what has happened here, though obviously none of us knows. I've said on this show before, I've got family in East Jerusalem, I've got family in the occupied West Bank, and when you go there, it becomes pretty obvious what the overall aim is, though one realized in slow motion. It's to annex the entire place, basically, and turn it from the West Bank into Judea and Samaria, so-called. So, yeah, I think it's very, very likely that Trump was having conversations with Netanyahu, saying something along the lines of, your adventure in Gaza has reached its limits now, but I'm incoming, and we will we'll arrange something far superior for you in the years ahead. And that, I think, is obviously extremely disturbing to everybody who's at all committed to Palestinian justice.
Could you explain? It's just sort of come to me, so I hope you have the answer. But sort of, I often hear that Israel is much more interested in the West Bank than Gaza in terms of sort of getting the land. Now, of course, they've withdrawn from Gaza, so it seems obvious they're interested in settling the West Bank in a way that they aren't with Gaza. Is that, or some might be with Gaza, but sort of occupying the West Bank and annexing the West Bank seems more fundamental to their aims. Is that for religious reasons? Is it Judea and Samaria because it sort of has I suppose, significance in terms of Judaism, or is it sort of the land is more fertile? Why is it that sort of the Israeli sort of Zionist project seems to care more about the West Bank than Gaza?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's both of those, really. It's first and foremost, well, at least, the biblical dimensions of it come first. It occupies an important place in biblical Judaism and so on, and in the Torah and so on. Whereas Gaza, less so. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is, from a political economic point of view, a far more advantageous place to have. I mean, Gaza, much aside from what's been done to it recently, it is a largely arid, dry strip of land. It's beautiful when it's not being bombed and pulverized to pieces, but it is an arid strip of land. It's very small, as we know, and it's less conducive to agriculture and so on. So it's a combination of those things, and there's a constant interplay, and you see it playing out in Israeli discourse between the kind of messianic settlers and then the kind of government ministers, both Labour and Likud, by the way. Until very recently, Labour, the Israeli Labour Party, had been in charge while more settlements were built relative to the Likud Party. But nonetheless, all of the mainstream political parties in Israel are, I would argue, regardless of their public-facing rhetoric, committed to colonizing the West Bank. And there is a dance that's done with extremist religious fundamentalists who act almost like the foot soldiers or shock troops or emissaries to carry that process out with the protection of the IDF, of course, and the Israeli government. But there are basically, it's a combination of factors that you and that we've highlighted.
With the ceasefire still holding in Gaza, further evidence of the apocalyptic destruction of the enclave is emerging. Many of the 1.9 million internally displaced Palestinians in Gaza have now begun making journeys across the strip to where they used to live. Most of them are flowing out of the narrow so-called safe zone of Al-Mawasi along the coast near the Egyptian border. But everywhere they go, the damage to cities, infrastructure, homes and roads is immense. According to UN estimates, 90% of housing units in the strip have been destroyed or damaged. There are no functioning hospitals, and thousands of unexploded munitions litter the more than 50 million tons of rubble left by Israel's bombardments. But once reconstruction begins, if it begins, Gaza also faces a less visible difficulty. Almost half of the enclave's population are children. Before the war, Palestinians had one of the highest literacy rates in the world. But since October 2023, Israel's war has destroyed or damaged 496 out of Gaza's 550 schools, and more than 500 teaching staff have been killed. All this means the children of Gaza have now missed more than a year of formal education, but there have been some organisations trying to keep learning going. Gaza Great Minds was set up by a group of teachers who wanted to reignite learning after their educational centre was bombed and demolished. They funded the setup of a tent to provide free education to 50 students. The organisation has expanded since then, and they now provide education, psychological support and one meal a day to over 1,000 students. The organisation has also put on cultural activities to try and bring some light to young people traumatized by war.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Do you hear this? The drones, 24/7 hovering above our heads. Do you want to see what we have inside our northern tent? Gaza Great Minds, Without Borders tent. Let's see together.
The man you saw at the start of that video was English teacher Ahmad Abu Razik. He is the founder of Gaza Great Minds. And earlier I spoke to Ahmad from Gaza City. In the conversation, Ahmad spoke about the challenge of educating children in a war zone and his hopes for the future of Gaza. But I started by asking him to describe where he was speaking to us from.
I'm one of the most luckiest people in Gaza because the building where I am is not totally destroyed. It's partly destroyed. I'm literally now standing on the rubbles. As you can see, it's partly destroyed. The rocks are everywhere. And this is where I make the streams. This is where I sit. And why I should be here, because I'm using eSIMs on my phone to bring internet. There's no internet connection in Gaza. So I had to go to a higher place like this one. I'm on the 4th floor. I don't know if you can see that. But I'm on the 4th floor and I need to be here. Even it's really cold. I'm freezing, as you can see. But I had to do this to have internet connection. Now, no house, especially in the north of Gaza, has left or standing. All of them are totally destroyed, or, like my apartment, partly destroyed. Me and my family, we tried to move the rubbles and find a room and stay in it. It's better than staying in the tent, but 90% of people, especially here in the northern side of Gaza, are living in a tent. Simply on the streets. They're sitting in a tent, in a nylon tent. It's really cold at night, by the way. The rats and insects coming 24/7. My house, my original house, it's not my house. This is a renting apartment that after 7th time of evacuation, we reached this point. And now this is, as you can hear, this is Adhan, the call for the prayer. I don't know if you hear it or not. So this is a renting apartment we are in, and we are supposed to leave it by next week because the owner of this apartment, his house was totally destroyed and he need to come here. So we need to find another place, and it's not easy at all. So we will be living in a tent next week.
Why did you decide to stay in Gaza City? I suppose sort of we've talked so much on this show and throughout sort of the Western media. So the presumption has been that most people have gone from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza. We talk so much about people going to the Al-Mawasi, supposedly safe zone where people still ended up getting shelled and hit by airstrikes. But why did you decide to stay in Gaza City over the past 15 months?
There was no option because many people, while they were on their way to the southern side of Gaza, they were bombed. Simply, while they were going to the so-called humanitarian areas or the safe zone, they were killed on the road. And you are talking about hundreds of massacres were committed in these humanitarian areas. So there's no place in Gaza is safe. We knew from the first day that they are lying on us by saying that it's a safe zone or not. If it's the safe zone, why people were massacred, why thousands of people were killed in the same certain point that Israeli said that, okay, people go there, you're gonna be safe. Hundreds, Michael, people, thousands of people were killed in these humanitarian areas. So I'm really glad that I didn't go there because either I would be killed on the way with my 3 kids. I had to go on foot. There's no vehicles, by the way. You need to walk, and maybe you will reach there after 2 nights, or so you need to stay at the street. So it's not easy. It's not an easy option to take. Or you will be go there and living in a tent, and you could be a target, just killed just because you're a Gazan. There's no safe places in Gaza. I'm sorry to say that.
The situation you're describing and sort of the scenes that so many of our audience will have seen sort of on social media of the destruction of Gaza, I mean, it looks hellish. And the idea that you carried on sort of an educational institution, yes, a sort of somewhat ad hoc one, sort of conducted in tents and the like, that will seem incredibly impressive to the people watching this and almost impossible. I mean, how do you teach kids in the middle of a war zone?
We are not just giving them the academic study. I tried through my initiative to give them hope because simply our students lost hope in the whole world, the whole universe, and the humanity in the outside world. So through our initiative or in our tents, we were focusing on connecting them with the outside world by sending messages from and to the students. And the students were wowed. Okay, for example, Michael is sending a message to me in Gaza and motivate him to study. And he sent another message out and it's been read. And you will see these examples here in our website or our platforms. But let me tell you something about Gaza. We are people value education a lot. And I'm gonna give you an example. There was in the recent invasion into the northern side of Gaza, we had to close the tent here in the northern side of Gaza for 2 days. 2 days. And we had many calls after those 2 days. From whom? From the fathers. What did they tell us? They told us, please open the tent. We told them it's risky. Maybe they will be targeted. They said, no, even if they will be targeted, let them smile while they are being killed because there's no place in Gaza safe. So we had to open again. We continue. We talked with UNICEF, UNRWA. They came, they visited the tent. They were astonished by the work which had been done. And they really offered help, but Israelis stopped or prevented them from bringing trucks to Gaza full of resources and other things. So back to the question, how we teach. We in Gaza, especially here in the northern side of Gaza, we try to make students just take them from the streets or take them from playing or running after the parachute bags and build an environment for them to be treated as children, simply. So inside these tents, you will feel like you are a child, you play, you have a psychiatric, you just have fun. That's why our students love our tents and they don't want to leave it.
And we're now 2 days into a ceasefire, which for now seems to be holding. Are you going to be continuing with your education program? And I suppose, what are your hopes now that there is, at least for the time being, some sort of peace? Do you think it's going to be easy enough to begin sort of expanding and rebuilding your program. What challenges will you face now?
First, it's not going to be easy because simply there's no places in Gaza left. So the rubble is everywhere. And we are simply making tents. But we will continue. Why? Because of two reasons. The first reason is there's no schools running in Gaza until the next year or after 2 years from now, because the rubble is big. All schools were totally destroyed or partly destroyed. So it needs a lot of time for the schools to be running again. The other reason that if we stopped, we will lost our generation, the students that we started with. You know, the gap is not easy. You are talking about over 1 year now. And most of the students, when we first gave them the classes, they couldn't even hold the pencil. They were panicked. They were shaking. So now we reach a point that if we stop, all our work will stop. Like, we will lose everything. So from now over, we will expand our tents. Alhamdulillah, thank God that we will be teaching without bombs on our heads or warplanes hovering above our heads. It's going to be a peaceful class, but it will be suffering because of also the resources. We need a lot of resources, educational resources, and we need wages for the teachers and other things to provide meals for the students, because they are really, really need these things after more than a year from starvation. We will continue, and our goal is to reach 100 tent schools in Gaza. With that number, we will be teaching 50,000 students. We already did 5 schools in war, and we hope to have or to build 95 in peace.
I wonder if you could sort of speak to us about the experience of this war for the children that you've been teaching. I mean, we'll know from seeing the external figures how many children have been how many children have been killed, how many children have been injured, how many children have been orphaned. And I wonder if you could sort of explain what the experience has been like for children as you understand, given that you have spent sort of so much time teaching the children of Gaza City.
I will give you an example because it's easier to understand. When we first set up the tent, we told the students to draw a picture. What do you think they drew?
Well, I would imagine someone getting killed or a bomb.
Yes. People, cuffed, people in jail, bombs, warplanes, and other terrifying things. And it was expected. The social trainer said that this is something normal as they are in war. After 4 months from our help, we told them to draw again. They drew the future. They drew their house being built again and rebuilt again. This is one example. And talking about orphans, this is the most heartbreaking thing. We had a child, his name is Amir, and he lost his father. His father was a great trader, by the way. He was very rich in Gaza. His father was killed, his house was totally destroyed, and they had to live in a renting apartment, totally destroyed apartment. Amir was very close to his father, and he wanted to continue his father's dream. So he wanted to be a trader. So what we have done, we went to Amir's mother, and we told him, okay, we want to run a business for Amir. He didn't believe at first. Okay, this is the first business I will have. Yeah, we bring them ice drinks and a cooler, and he started to sell these to the students and on the streets. And he was very happy with that. He felt like, oh, I'm gonna follow my father's step. And in that way, we helped him psychologically. He loved life again. He started to support his family, his mother, in these dire situations. So this is one example, and we have a lot of examples regarding that. But I can tell you, Michael, it wasn't easy at all. And I believe the coming days will be harder, because now is the real work, mentally, psychologically, and from every aspect. We need to focus more, because the coming generation will be full of hate, full of rage or anger, and we need to bring their childhood again. They don't deserve to see all of this. They are just children. So we will continue, inshallah.
there have been suggestions sort of throughout this whole ordeal that maybe the Gulf states would cough up money for rebuilding Gaza. And people talk about international coalitions or the Palestinian Authority sort of coming in to do the job. I'm not expecting you to sort of come with some fully formed solution to all of this. I mean, it seems impossible in a way. But do you have sort of any thoughts on what you want to see now, how you sort of see the rebuilding of Gaza working as we move forward?
Maybe you'll be shocked, but people start already rebuilding Gaza. People on the ground start to go to the rubbles and move them by hand because there's no bulldozer or trucks to move these things. But it's really, really tiring. Like you are going back to the Stone Age and you need to do everything by your hand. If we want to wait till the Israelis allow the trucks or these instructions or rebuilding again, we will need a lot of time. So in our mind here, we hope in the coming few months, I'm not talking about weeks, it's going to be impossible, more hands come and help Gaza, especially from the neighboring countries. If that happens, things will be faster and we will be able to set up our own school, because we are thinking of making our own orphan schools to help those who are orphaned and those who are totally traumatized from war. So it's not easy at all, and people start to set up tents on the beach of Gaza because they know that this will take a lot of time. And there's no renting apartments in Gaza. And in every apartment, you will see 2 or 3 families living. So it's really crowded area. And we are expected after the southern people coming to the northern side of Gaza, it will be more crowded. So you are talking about this tiny place and a million people will come to this tiny place. So it's going to be really, really crowded and people will live another war after the war, because the rebuilding is something that Gaza can't do it alone. We need governments, big governments, to come and help. If that happened, I assure you, 1 year, and you will see Gaza much, much better than this. At least regarding the rubbles and the rocks on the streets. Another 2 years, and you will see Gaza rebuilt again. But without help, it will take a lot. 10 years, 15 years at least.
Could you just talk about some sort of basic questions that our audience might be sort of curious about? Do you have access to water? Do you have access to food, to electricity? I mean, is the Gazan economy in any way functioning? For example, are people working in your sort of tent schools getting paid? Are the children's parents who you're teaching, do they have access to funds? What's going on? Or is it kind of a barter economy, all completely reliant on the aid agencies?
Lining life, or the life of lines, this is how we live. So if you need to charge your phone, you need to stand in a line for 2 hours in order to charge it, because we have some solar panels stations, and you need to go there and stand for maybe an hour, 2 hours to charge your phone. Another journey, if you want to fill the gallon of water, you need to do the same thing, because there are some organizations bringing trucks on the streets and to give people water, so you need to stand in line. Regarding, it's actually, water is the most disastrous thing because it's really, really tiring. I'm talking about myself. It takes us about 2 hours, more or less, every day to fill just 25 liters of water, the gallon. So it's really tiring. We have to take it to the 4th floor by hand. There's no electricity to move the water up to the roof. And also to the food. If you want to eat now, I know now it's better now, but because there are some food in the markets. But regarding bread, because we're still suffering with this, when you go to the bakery, you will find a line, stay for 4 hours. So it's just a lining life. You need, everything is in line, and you feel like you are a number. You're waiting your number to come to take your things and get back home, and you reach your home. No electricity, no cold, no warm water to take a shower. So you need to make a wood, to make a fire from wood. And recently we didn't have wood in the markets or even on the streets. People take everything. So we start to fire the nylon, the unhealthy things. It's really make cancer diseases and other things. Well, there's no other chance or choices. We had to make a fire to eat. And for example, one last thing, if you, Michael, before you sleep, you want to have a cup of tea, you prefer not to have it because you will suffer with fire, and you will go to another area to make a fire because you can't make a fire at home. It's risky. So it's not a life. It's not a life at all.
So Ahmad Abu Razik speaking to me earlier from Gaza City. Really, really impressive, inspirational man who's been through some awful things. He did actually tell me before the part of the interview we showed you there that his father had been killed in the wars. Just incredibly strong, really, really impressive guy. And you can support Gaza Great Minds, which sounds like a great organization, by going to their website and donating. So the website is gazagreatminds.org. We'll, of course, also put a link to that website in the description box below. Elon Musk is probably US President Donald Trump's most influential ally. The tech billionaire has served as an unofficial advisor to Trump, will head up his new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, and he played a prominent role on the campaign trail. You might even call Musk Trump's right-hand man. And speaking of right hands, during a speech celebrating Trump's inauguration, Musk made this pretty striking gesture.
There are elections that come and go. Some elections are, important. Some are not. But this one, this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you. My heart goes out to you.
That was pretty explicit. Right? He's not an idiot. Like, he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. Right? He's not a. I mean, he's an idiot by sort of many definitions of the word, but he's a highly intelligent man. Right? I think he knows what he's doing. As you can imagine, Musk's gesture has created an avalanche of reaction, and there was a fair amount of debate over whether it even was a Nazi salute. Andrieu is an advisor to Musk, based in Italy. She posted this. That gesture, which some mistook for a Nazi salute, is simply Elon, who has autism, expressing his feelings by saying, "I want to give my heart to you." And that is exactly what he communicated into the microphone. Elon dislikes extremists. Now, if you've been following Elon on Twitter for the past few weeks, you'll know that one of his main priorities seems to be to free Tommy Robinson, a man who has been to prison multiple times in this country for contempt of court and for violence, who is sort of a far-right street funk. Musk also has endorsed the AfD, a far-right German party, many of their leading members who have found themselves sort of breaking German law by using Nazi slogans. So it's not like, oh no, Elon Musk would never associate with Nazis, so it couldn't possibly have been a Hail Hitler sign. Well, it so happens that he's always hanging out with Nazis. That's kind of just what he does. It's kind of seems to be one of the ways he passes time. And now he's doing these Heil Hitler salutes. Or I should say he hangs out with people who are Nazi adjacent. Maybe I'll do that in case he's sort of going to have beef. Even some of Musk's critics were prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt, though. Well, not really. This was Jon Stewart on The Daily Show.
Okay. Charitably, I'm going to say that was just an awkward, my heart goes out to you gesture. Many of you might have done it like this. Even Taylor Swift has done that, my heart, but she almost never does the goes out to you. Like, just always stays with, but, listen, it's nerve-wracking day. You're not normally a public speaker. It's a one-off gesture. Please try not to use it again. Son of a bitch. You really want to make sure the people in the back see it, I guess.
Others weren't in the mood to joke about Musk's gesture. Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler, who, like Jon Stewart, is Jewish, posted this on X. I never imagined we would see the day when what appears to be a Heil Hitler salute would be made behind the presidential seal. This abhorrent gesture has no place in our society and belongs in the darkest chapters of human history. I urge all of my colleagues to unite in condemning this hateful gesture for what it is, anti-Semitism. LBC's James O'Brien also, I think, had quite a good challenge for anyone who disagreed.
It's also illegal to give the Nazi salute in Germany and in Austria. So anybody minded to tell me that that's not what Elon Musk was doing must encourage him to go and do it in Germany and see what happens. And in fact, if you don't think it was a Nazi salute, why don't you do it at parents' night next time you're at your kid's school? Or just do it now if you're at work and see what happens. I think that's probably the best way to test it. Do it. Make sure you do it twice as well, and make sure you hit your chest first before you throw your arm in the air.
No one else is. You know, you've got someone who's always flirting with the far right. Always flirting. I mean, he's not flirting. He's always actively endorsing the far right. Right. That's something he does publicly all the time. And I don't think you can find any. You know, if this was just sort of like an accidental salute that sometimes people make, surely we'd be able to find someone else who'd gone. You know, people keep sort of showing these screenshots where it's quite easy to find a sort of still of someone where their arm looks like that. But it's quite rare, right? And that is what there's loads of sort of tweets out today sort of showing Nazis on demos exactly what they do. They sort of pump their chest and then put their arm out sort of straight in that fascist salute. So, I mean, you know, Occam's razor suggests the guy has some Nazi sympathies. And of course, there were others who also saw a Nazi salute. These guys loved it, though. White nationalist group White Lives Matter posted this on Telegram in response to the gesture. Thanks for sometimes hearing us, Elon. The white flame will rise again. And then, I mean, this is a photoshopped image. Elon Musk, stop white genocide. That's sort of a very strong far-right meme. Elon Musk has added his own response to the row. Frankly, they need better dirty tricks. That everyone is Hitler attack is so tired. Now, I mean, you know, there's potentially a case to be made that sort of like the Hitler sort of analogy is made too often. But this is literally a guy who has allied with a party that's broken laws for using Nazi slogans. Once Tommy Robinson freed, Tommy Robinson was a member of the BNP, neo-Nazi party, and he's done what looks very much like a Nazi salute twice on stage. Kieran, I think, you know, in the studio we were discussing this, and I think lots of people will be having the same thoughts at the moment, which is, you know, I said Occam's razor is he's got Nazi sympathies. I think, you know, given that he's an intelligent person, this is probably a controversy he's invited. You know, I think probably he enjoys the fact that everyone is now sort of debating whether or not that gesture was a Nazi salute. And that means sort of the temptation is, should we ignore it? Should we get outraged? Should we say it's, you know, I don't know what, I'll leave this as an open question. How do you think we should respond to this kind of thing?
Okay, so first things first, I dispute that he's highly intelligent. But I know what you mean. He's got something obvious besides $300 billion. But I dispute he's highly intelligent. He's, you know, his the son of an emerald mine owner who's failed upwards, and I suppose that does require a certain je ne sais quoi. But you know, to the point, I mean, I see no reason to give Elon Musk any kind of benefit of the doubt. It seems pretty clear to me that it was a Sieg Heil. And do you know what it makes me, watching it back there, think? It's almost like when you say to people, oh, I'm going to have this platform, or I'm going to be on this show, or I'm going to be on this radio show. And they say, oh, drop this in-joke in. You know, why don't you find a way to say this in-joke in a way that sort of, you know, flows and doesn't, you know, pique the interviewers, what are you talking about, kind of thing. And I wouldn't be surprised if his Alternative for Deutschland buddies or some other Nazis or fascists that he knocks about with didn't say to him, I bet you couldn't do a Sieg Heil in front of the presidential banner on the day of the inauguration. He said, let me show you that I can. There's something of that about it to me. I think another interesting related phenomenon I've noticed today that I just want to quickly highlight, because I do think it has relevance to other discussions that we often have on this show. I noticed that the editor at large of the Jewish Chronicle, Stephen Pollard, tweeted something like, "Oh, give over. You don't really believe that it was a Nazi salute. You're just," something to the effect that you've got leftist brainworms, or you've been programmed to think that way, etc., etc. I mean, Stephen Pollard has been at the forefront of every single mob and witch hunt trying to associate the most innocuous things with anti-Semitism if they are in any way critical of Israel. And what that says to me is that the medium is the message for these people. I mean, we've known it for a long time, but it's another piece of evidence that the medium is the message. In other words, you can get away with doing a Zig Heil in public and not be called anti-Semitic if only you will shill for and support Israeli war crimes. I think that's one of the more interesting aspects for all of this that I've come across today anyway. As for everything else, he's an attention seeker. Of course he is. He's half brain dead. Of course he is. Should we not talk about it? Unfortunately, it's too serious. It's kind of comical because it's so absurd, but it is also serious precisely because he does knock around with and lends, we assume, tremendous financial succor to the international far right.
Now, amongst all the heat generated by Elon Musk's hand gesture, there was one reaction that really rubbed people up the wrong way. The Anti-Defamation League is a New York-based organization that was founded to tackle anti-Semitism. And while Israel was busy razing Gaza to the ground, the ADL found plenty of examples of anti-Jewish hate. This was ADL President Jonathan Greenblatt on MSNBC last year.
And if you wouldn't tolerate it, if someone's wearing a swastika on their arm, I'm sorry, you shouldn't tolerate it if they're wearing a keffiyeh.
The way that video cuts out, that's from the original. I think he didn't have the best internet connection. But you saw there, he was saying that wearing a keffiyeh is sort of a sort of cultural item that sort of symbolizes, I suppose, sort of solidarity with the Palestinians. That's the same as having a swastika. So this is someone who seems to be clearly very, very sensitive and very, very sort of willing to sort of put out the idea that, oh no, that's Nazi adjacent, and that's Nazi adjacent, that's Nazi adjacent, even when it's completely, obviously it goes without saying, it's completely outrageous analogy to make, right? But given that, you might find it a little surprising how relaxed the ADL seems when it comes to Musk doing a literal Heil Hitler symbol from a stage. So the ADL said, "This is a delicate moment." This is in response to Musk. "It's a new day, and yet so many are on edge. Our politics are inflamed, and social media only adds to the anxiety. It seems that Elon Musk made an awkward gesture in a moment of enthusiasm, not a Nazi salute. But again, we appreciate that people are on edge. In this moment, all sides should give one another a bit of grace, perhaps even the benefit of the doubt, and take a breath. This is a new beginning. Let's hope for healing and work towards unity in the months and years ahead." Now, in a way, reading that tweet, I think there are sort of elements of that tweet where I kind of do get the sentiment. I often say it's important for us to give sort of people grace, perhaps give people the benefit of the doubt, don't necessarily assume the worst, try to assume the best. But this is from an organization whose leader went on national television and said, if you wear the keffiyeh, Palestinian scarf, you are basically a Nazi, right? This is not an organization who likes to give other sides a bit of grace. This is an organization that loves to call people Nazis unless they happen to support Israel, even if they're doing literally Nazi salutes on stage. Of course, some have long accused the ADL of being a front for Israeli rather than Jewish interests. This article in The Nation accused the ADL of being Israel's attack dog in the US and asked why the media still treated it as a credible source. If that's right, then Musk's proximity to the very pro-Israel president may make him a figure worth defending. In response to the ADL's Trump tweet, Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted this. Just to be clear, you are defending a Hail Hitler salute that was performed and repeated for emphasis and clarity. People can officially stop listening to you as any sort of reputable source of information now. You work for them. Thank you for making that crystal clear to all. I said, by the way, Elon Musk sort of close to Trump, who's very pro-Israel. Elon Musk has also done a lot of posing with Netanyahu. This is probably going to be a wake-up call to lots of people about the ADL, right, Kieran?
I would hope so. And sorry to veer away from that immediately. I'm happy to return to it, but it made me think, listening to everything you were just saying then, Michael, that this is a controversial thing to say maybe, but I often feel as a Palestinian that we're more hated by some ardent Zionists than Nazis. And yeah, everything that I've just read and seen firms up that suspicion, unfortunately. As for the AFD, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know if it will wake anybody up. I fear, and I'll relate it back to what I said at the beginning of the show when I was talking in the context of Trump's executive orders, that the real challenge for the left now is to not allow the vicious cycle to continue. The vicious cycle being that the electorate votes for leaders who are socially far right in many cases, are economically, shock doctrine levels neoliberal, and which implement the policies which lead to the corrosion of social relations. But instead of turning to the left in the face of that process, they turn back to and further to the right of the same demagogues that offered them the solutions in the first place, partly because of the nature of the media class and many other factors. That is breaking that cycle is the major challenge facing us. And of course, the AFD, Elon Musk, Tommy fucking Robinson, all of them are part of that. All of them are part of that alignment. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a reason why, if you are, I mean, it's why, I suppose, why we sort of led the show, not with an Elon Musk hand gesture, but the fact that Donald Trump has passed a bunch of executive orders which are very blatantly and obviously in the self-interest of all the billionaires who are backing him. That probably is the more substantive thing that happened yesterday, but that doesn't mean you completely ignore that Elon Musk seems to be a fascist. Kieran, thank you so much for joining me this evening. Very insightful contributions as always.
Great to be here, Michael. Thanks for the range of topics and thanks for having me back.
And thank you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow night for another live show from 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.